And now the way I want to end is with a great testimony of a young girl that I got to know because she's the assistant to the minister of music, and she is so cute. And when she walks into the choir suite, she just exudes sunshine. And I would call her, I'd say her personality is bubbly. And she sings on the praise team in the morning, and then she stays for choir and sings in the celebration choir. And I know she has a fantastic story. And after she speaks, then I want Jessica to close us out with a solo. And so, God bless you, Kathryn. Thanks for sharing. Tell your story.
Okay. Thank you. So that was kind of a nice way for Linda to describe my personality. And I put in here that I can be a bit of a goofball. So it took a lot of bravery for the WMU committee to give me an open mic, a stage, and a captive audience. So thank you guys very much. And I'm really excited to share with you. So I was asked to share my testimony and to talk specifically about how it relates to Hannah's Hope, which is a ministry that I started here at the church that deals with pregnancy loss. And I know that a lot of you in here have been affected by a pregnancy loss, but I also know that there's a large portion of you who haven't. So I was trying to think about what I wanted to say, and I just wanted to make sure that it was applicable to everyone. And so I thought that, we all have things in common in that we all have times in life when we feel like we've just been handed a helping of something that's just really crummy and not really what we were wanting. So I know that the tough stuff isn't what we all want to sit around and talk about all the time, but my hope is that you will be able to recognize those things in your life that are redeemable, and you will be encouraged to see how God can make something beautiful out of those things. Because who are we kidding? Like our speaker said, if we pretend like we have it together all the time, because a lot of the times I think I'm only kidding myself. So I recognize that each of you could stand up here and share stories that would probably have us all in tears. And one of the things that I think makes it difficult for women to share is that we tend to feel like our hurts aren't valid, or that we don't want to be dramatic, or we don't want to draw too much attention to ourselves. Or maybe we think that what we experienced is so terrible that we don't even want to put people through the pain of hearing it. So wherever you think that you are on that scale, I just want you to know that God cares about every hurt, no matter how small or how big, and that as children of God, we are called to love each other in the same way that He loves us. So the story that I'm sharing today starts last fall, well, actually the fall of 2012, when my husband Mark and I decided that we wanted to add biological children to our family. And we were blessed when only a few months later I saw that life-changing second line on a pregnancy test. And the next day was February 14th, and so I got one of those digital tests. Nowadays, you can actually have a test that will write out the word pregnant or not pregnant. And it's kind of like someone grabbing you on the shoulders and like shaking you and saying, "You are pregnant," because you see those two lines and you're like, "Well, really? Like, is that really a line?" I have a friend who, when she got a pregnant result on a test, she called her doctor's office and said, "Well, I think I might be pregnant." And they said, "Well, did you take a pregnancy test?" And she said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, what does it say?" And she said, "Well, it says I'm pregnant." And they said, "Well, you're pregnant." So sometimes we need that little bit of encouragement. So there I was on Valentine's Day with the word spelled out on a digital test. And so we were excited in planning for October for a new member of our family. So the beginning of my pregnancy was rocky, and so around 7 weeks, they had me come in for an early ultrasound to check everything out. And at that ultrasound, we were able to see a tiny baby with an even tinier fluttering heart that was beating at a very healthy 150 beats per minute. So we were thrilled, and we felt like it was a sigh of relief. Nothing's ever guaranteed, but at that point, they say, "Oh, well, you only have a 5% chance of something happening once you can see a heartbeat." And so about 3 weeks after that, we went in for another, just a routine prenatal appointment, and the doctor wanted to look at some things on the ultrasound, check everything out, and we could see our baby on the screen, but we could also see that the baby wasn't moving. And so this is one of those times in your life where you kind of feel like time suspends and you like play everything kind of through a movie. And so we're staring at the screen, and my husband and I and the doctor were all kind of trying to will the baby to move and to see that heartbeat that had been so strong just a few weeks before. And then my doctor started using words that nobody really wants to hear a doctor say, words like, I'm sorry, and DNC. So from there, we went to the hospital to get a confirmation ultrasound on a fancier machine where it was painfully clear that our baby's heart was no longer beating. And so 4 days later, on April 8th, I had a DNC. And then we began to try to find our new normal and grieve for our loss. In November, we had a second loss. So I come to you today very much still in the middle of that circumstance. I wish I could say, and now I have all of these beautiful children, and hopefully I will one day, but I just want you to know that my story is still on the side where I'm seeing God redeem it, but I'm not on the other side of it yet. So for me, that was a moment when time stopped and things changed. And so for you, maybe it was also in a doctor's office, or maybe it was when a relationship ended that you thought would never end. Maybe it was when you got an unexpected phone call. Maybe things changed for you because an addiction had taken too tight of a grip on you or on someone you love. Maybe for you it wasn't one moment, but a series of moments strung together that made up a season of weariness or what seems like a lifetime of burdens. So what do we do with these moments? I'm sure we can all recognize times where we had these really crummy things happen and we thought, wow, I really should have and could have handled that better. So what do we do? And I know there's lots of ways that we can say we can handle these things better in hindsight, but I want us to focus on a couple of things. So when we think about all our stuff, how can we let God redeem our losses and make them beautiful? So I know there are times we look at our circumstances and we think this is way too ugly and way too terrible to even think about what good could possibly come from this. And that's totally okay to think that. But we can't stay in that place for forever, or we turn into rotting fruit. So for me, I knew shortly after our loss, while I was still grieving, but I knew that I wanted to use my experience to help others. So I began to be open about what happened to us, and I very quickly saw how many women suffered from the same pain and grief. I also realized how many women kept their pain inside them. And I saw this was an area where the church, capital C, desperately needed to be ministering. So because of my experience, myself and a friend of mine started a ministry here that ministers to families who have experienced these losses. And we give boxes to families who have had miscarriage, stillbirth, or early infant death. I'm not going to go into all the details of the ministry. I'd love to talk to you about it afterward. But and I know that not everyone here is going to start in ministry about whatever your particular issue is, because that would be really excessive. But I know that there is a way that everyone here can be redeeming our circumstances. So I just have a couple questions that I want you guys to think about when you think of those times in your life that have marked you. Are you using that experience to help the body of Christ? How could you reach out to someone who had a situation that was similar to yours? Are you using your situation to offer hope and light to those who are currently in the darkness that you were once in? Do you see a huge need that no one is meeting that you feel called to meet? So as you think about those questions, I want you to guard your heart and your mind against Satan. Don't let him tell you that you can't make a difference or that people don't want to listen to you. Don't let him tell you that your idea will fail and that you will be embarrassed. And don't let him tell you that your story isn't worth sharing. There's a song that is popular right now on Christian radio. It's called Every Act of Love. And it talks about how we are vessels for God's light and his love, and that we bring the kingdom to those around us, which I think is kind of what everyone's been saying this morning, that we are the hands of Christ reaching out to others. And the bridge of the song says, God put a million doors in the world for his love to walk through. One of those doors is you. So one of those doors for God's love is you. You can be used by God to share his love with others who are hurting. And don't let self-doubt and the lies that we are told convince you to shut the door. When we use our experiences to share the love of Christ and to reach out to others, we are allowing God to redeem our hurts and use them to bring something beautiful. So it's the first thing. So how do we redeem those things? The second thing that I want to point to is the importance of community. And this really ties closely to the first one, but I really want to emphasize community with each other, believers, with women, just in everyday life. There's a book by Shauna Niequist, who's one of my favorite authors. It's called Bittersweet, and she talks about how we can find the sweet in the bitter things in life. And I'm going to share a little bit from her book. I think that in today's world of Pinterest, it's easy for us to strive to make it look like we have it all together all the time. And Shauna wrote, "I've spent most of my life and most of my friendships holding my breath and hoping that when people get close enough, they won't leave, and fearing that it's a matter of time before they figure me out and go." And so don't we all have some of that fear that we're going to be found out, that people will know what we are really thinking or what we really fear or what we've really done? But the reality is we're all in this together. We all have crazy thoughts. We all have our hurts. We have our past and present circumstances that are less than ideal. So while I'm not encouraging sitting around and bemoaning our lives 24/7, I think it's very important that we allow our friends to see and help us with our burdens. And perhaps when we allow a friend to help us with our burdens, they will feel more free to let us help them when they need help with it. So I think most of us crave that deep friendship of true community, but sometimes we have to take the first step. And it may not always be reciprocated, and that's okay, we can move on. But when we allow ourselves to become vulnerable, we are showing others that it's okay to not pretend like we have it together all the time, and that may be the first step in them being vulnerable as well. Community also helps us identify lies that we hear and that we swirl around in our head. If I have a thought that I've swirled in my head and convinced myself is true about any given circumstance, it may take one friend to tell me the truth that can change everything. Shauna writes, "We sometimes choose the most locked up, dark versions of the story, but what a good friend does is turn on the lights, open the window, and remind us that there are a whole lot of ways to tell that same story." Maybe a friend's perspective is a way for us to see our trials in a new light. Maybe that person can be what opens our eyes to seeing how God can redeem our circumstances. Maybe by reaching out to someone that you know is hurting, you can open the windows of their heart and bring that same light to them. Maybe you don't know what to say to someone who's experienced something because you haven't experienced it, and so you're just not really sure how to approach them. But you can always tell a person that you're praying for them or you're willing to talk, and you can always ask someone how they're really doing. And you never know when that little bit of encouragement may make a huge difference for a person. So before I close, I have one final thought from Shauna. She says, "I believe deeply that God does his best work in our lives during great times of heartbreak and loss. I believe that much of that rich work is done by the hands of people who love us, who dive into the wreckage with us and show us who God is, over and over and over. I believe that God is making all things new. I believe that Christ overcame death, and that pattern is apparent all through life and history. Life from death, water from a stone, redemption from failure, connection from alienation. I believe that suffering is part of the narrative, and that nothing really good gets built when everything's easy." I think that's a pretty awesome quote. So life can be really awesome and great. Obviously, it's not all trials, but it also has some tough stuff in it. And so as Christ followers, let's be examples, like she's talking about being witnesses. Let's also be examples to the world of how to be real and how to be honest about the tough stuff. Let's be examples of what true, genuine friendships and honest friendships really are. Let's show them how to bear each other's burdens and how to be the love of Christ. Let's show them what the kingdom of God could look like. Let's show them what it looks like to take the dust of our circumstances and allow God to redeem it and make it something new. And I guarantee you that will be way better than Pinterest. Thank you.